Welcome to the Gut 360 podcast. I'm your host, Ellie Breacher, a registered associate nutritionist on a mission to empower you to transform the health of your mind, body, and gut. This podcast is the place where we share nutrition tips, mindset tools, and actionable steps to help you thrive on your journey to a healthier gut and a happier you. If you're ready to get into the driver's seat of your own health and unlock your full potential, you're in the right place, and I am so glad you're here. Welcome back to your Monday morning dose of gut health, inspiration, and education. It's been a while and I've missed the podcast. We're technically on a break. Season 1 is finished and we're not quite there with season 2. But I wanted to bring you guys this bonus episode because I was recently recording as a guest on a nutritionist, Louise Digby's podcast. So this episode is all about hormones, weight loss, and gut health, and how these three are so interlinked. Now, this is something that comes up all the time in clinic. A lot of my clients will come to me struggling with women's health problems, whether it's PCOS, PMS, menopause, or other hormonal issues, and we will often go straight to the gut because, as you know, the gut plays such a crucial role in so many different systems of the body, including our hormones. So I hope you guys enjoy listening to this episode. Welcome, Ellie Breacher, to the Thriving Metabolism Podcast. Really pleased to have you here and very much looking forward to chatting with you today. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you today. So I always really like to start by finding out about you and kind of what brought you into the world of nutrition. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how you came to do that. What's your backstory? So I am a registered associate nutritionist. I specialize in gut health. And the reason I got into nutrition and more specifically gut health is through my own health journey. So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at the age of 8. It's an autoimmune digestive condition. It really affected my life growing up and continues to do so, but it's much more manageable now. But that really got me to realize that the food we put in our body actually affects how we feel. And that sounds so obvious when I say it out loud, but so many people don't put 2 and 2 together that what you eat really is going to affect how you feel. So I started off at university. I was studying French and Spanish. And by the time I was coming to the end of my first degree, I realized nutrition is very much the path that I want to pursue. And so I ended up doing another 4-year undergrad degree at university to get my Bachelor of Science in nutrition. And I then opened my own private nutrition clinic specializing in gut health. So I help people with IBS, bloating, all those kinds of things. Also other health issues, so many things tie into gut health, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but by specializing in gut health, it means I also get to help people with their hormones, their cholesterol, their weight management, all these other, PCOS, so many things that tie into the gut as well. So that's just a little summary about how I got to where I am today. Amazing. Yeah, the gut is fascinating, isn't it? Because it, like you say, is connected to everything that's going on in the body. And so often with my clients now who are all working on their weight and their hormones, but also clients in the past who have been working on pretty much everything and anything, we almost always start with the gut, because if your gut isn't functioning well or there's imbalances in the bacteria in the gut, then it's going to be very difficult for those other areas to restore balance. So on that note, there's a very strong link between weight and metabolism and gut health. So how does the gut connect to metabolism and weight management? There really are so many links here between the gut and specifically the gut microbiome and weight management. So I'm going to start by just explaining what the gut microbiome is for anyone who's unsure. Essentially, it is the community of the trillions of bacteria, viruses, fungi that live inside our gut or our intestines. And that sounds a bit gross and weird, but they really help they help improve our health. They're essential for our body. We want them to be kind of in a good balance between the friendlier bacteria and the more harmful pathogenic bacteria. But ideally, we want a healthy balance of the two.
So, for example, certain species of gut bacteria in the microbiome have been linked to how our bodies store fat and metabolize fat. So that's going to impact weight management. And we've also got certain species of bacteria that are linked to obesity. That one's a bit more of a kind of chicken and egg situation. So we think that our gut microbes may make us obese, and we think that those people who are obese could change their gut microbiome. So it probably works both ways. Then we've also got bacteria and kind of imbalances within bacteria that can lead to inflammation in the body. And that inflammation can be associated with metabolic disorders, so things like obesity, insulin resistance. But then if you have a healthy microbiome, that can actually reduce inflammation and support our metabolic health. So a lot of links there.
Yeah, so many different ways that it impacts what's going on in your body. And I think someone listening to this might be thinking, okay, so I need to be working on my gut to be able to lose weight, or, potentially it might need to be part of my weight loss strategy. How does someone know if they need to focus more on their gut? What are some of the signs and symptoms that there could be something more going on there?
Great question. So I think the most obvious one is if they're struggling with digestive issues, whether that's a change in bowel movements, bloating, excessive gas, anything like that, you're obviously going to know that there might be something going on in your gut. But then there's a lot of more subtle things that you wouldn't necessarily realize might be directly related to your gut. So things like skin issues, maybe someone is struggling with acne or eczema or psoriasis. These can all be signs that there's something to look at in your gut. Also, immune system issues. So 70% of our immune system is located in the gut. So if you're one of those people who catches every cold, every bug, every virus going around, that could be a signal that there's something deeper going on there as well. You also want to think about your hormones. So there is that big relationship between the gut and hormones. So if you struggle with PCOS, or if you get very bad PMS, there might be a link here with the gut, because we know that some gut bacteria are kind of very heavily involved in metabolizing those hormones like estrogen and progesterone. So a lot of different systems in the body that all really do tie into the gut.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you mentioned like the non-digestive symptoms as well, like skin symptoms and the other things, because with the clients that we work with, we very often look at gut bacteria, and we often find that there's imbalances there, but that person may not necessarily have obvious gut issues. So it doesn't always mean that if your gut is kind of seemingly functioning well, it doesn't mean that you don't need to focus on your gut health. And I would argue that we all need to focus on our gut health, because the modern lifestyle that we have is not really one that's conducive with a healthy gut. So with saying that, why is it that we need to have this big focus on gut health? What's causing all these imbalances in the gut?
There's a lot of things to consider here. Part of our gut microbiome is genetic, but so much of it is within our control. It's lifestyle factors, it's what we're eating. So some things that might be contributing to poor gut health or some imbalances in the gut microbiome. Number one is the overuse of antibiotics. Now, obviously, when we need them, we have to take them. I'm beyond grateful for antibiotics. I've taken my fair share, but we don't want to use them unnecessarily. So for example, if you go to the GP and you've got a virus and he hands you antibiotics, which are technically antibacterial infections, it's not going to do anything except, it damages your gut microbiome, because what happens is, as well as killing the bad bacteria that's causing the bacterial infection that you have if you're taking them, it also kills the good bacteria. It wipes out the good bacteria from your gut. So overuse of antibiotics is one to be aware of. Ultra-processed foods is another. So things like bulking agents, gums, thickeners, artificial sweeteners, all of these can cause damage to the composition of the gut microbiome. They can damage the bacteria living inside our guts, our intestines. So that's another one to be mindful of. Another one is diets that are low in fiber. So fiber is amazing fuel for our gut microbes. Our gut microbiome loves fiber, it feeds off fiber. So if we're not consuming much fiber, if we're eating lots of bland white carbohydrates and not many vegetables and nuts and seeds and whole grains and lentils, we're not getting enough fiber, then we're not giving our gut the fuel that it wants. And then the last thing that I would say is chronic stress. Chronic stress can really alter our gut microbiome as well. It can alter our gut motility, so how fast the food actually moves through your gut, your GI tract. It can alter the intestinal permeability as well, so the strength of our gut barrier and how able it is to kind of regulate what's passing through into the bloodstream. And it can even alter our immune function as well. And like I said earlier, 70% of our immune system is in our gut.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? So I think a lot of people are probably aware that they might need to eat more fiber. And oftentimes when people try to up their fiber intake, they can find it difficult to digest it and can end up with more bloating and flatulence and not feeling so good. So why does that happen? And what can someone who wants to look after their gut and eat more fiber do about that?
Such a good question. This is something I hear a lot from my clients, from people I speak to. And with fiber, you want to increase gradually, really, really gradually. So if you go from eating no fiber to having a cauliflower and chickpea and kale salad every day, and then having lentils for dinner, you're going to feel really bloated. So go slow, build up gradually, incorporate a little bit more fruits and vegetables. Cooked fruits and cooked vegetables can be much easier to digest when you're first starting. So, things like cooked carrots, stewed apples, ground flaxseed, nut butter before having loads of nuts. Nut butter can be a slightly easier way. Blending them into smoothies, thinking about how you're making them. So rather than having lots of like raw kale and cabbage, maybe you're steaming it, maybe you're roasting it with some olive oil. So thinking about how you're having it, how you're preparing it, also how you're preparing things like beans and lentils. So washing them, rinsing them really, really well. Some people find that soaking them in water with a little squeeze of lemon juice or salt or something with some acidity can help to kind of break down that outer layer and make it much easier to digest, especially if you're new to all the legumes and pulses.
Yeah, that's super helpful tips. And I always think that so often when you hear like advice about food, it's always very one-dimensional. And often what's not mentioned is how the food is prepared or cooked. And, it's kind of like the same for when people say, oh, I don't like broccoli. And it's like, well, what broccoli have you eaten? Is it just boiled broccoli? Have you tried roasting it, or have you tried stir frying it? Because, it all tastes very different when you prepare it differently. And it's the same for the fiber in those foods. If you can't tolerate them so well, let's look at how we're preparing them. It's going to make it easier to digest them.
Exactly. I completely agree. It's all about how you're preparing it. And there are, like you said, there are so many different things we can do, different ways we can prepare them. So absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit about hormones in the gut, because I talk a lot with my clients about their hormones and how they impact your weight management and also lots of other things in the body. I know you touched on it before, but let's dig into it a bit more. How does your hormone balance relate to what's going on in your gut?
Yeah, definitely. So the gut microbiome plays a really key role in regulating our hormones, and the ones that are specifically involved in things like appetite control and metabolism and fat storage. So all of these are going to intersect with our weight as well. So some of the key hormones here are leptin. So leptin is the satiety hormone or the fullness hormone. And what it does is it signals to the brain when the body has had enough food, so when we should stop eating. And when we get imbalances in the gut microbiome, that can actually lead to something called leptin resistance. So the brain stops responding properly to the leptin signals, and that can contribute to overeating and in turn weight gain. And then there's another hormone called ghrelin, which is kind of the opposite. It's the hunger hormone. So that tells us, it stimulates the appetite and food intake in turn. So when our brain realizes that our appetite is high, that's going to encourage us to reach for food. And studies, again, here, they suggest that the gut microbiome can influence ghrelin secretion. So certain bacteria can be associated with higher ghrelin levels and an increased appetite as well. And then we also have things like insulin, which is a hormone that's produced by the pancreas, and that helps to regulate our blood sugar levels. And when we get dysbiosis, or that imbalance in the bacteria in the gut, so the imbalance in good and bad bacteria, that's been linked to insulin resistance, and that can lead to higher blood sugar levels and increased fat storage. And then we've also got cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. It's produced by our adrenal glands. And when we get chronic stress, so chronically high levels of cortisol, that can disrupt the balance of the gut bacteria. And that can increase things like our intestinal permeability. It can lead to inflammation and also dysbiosis. So again, that disruption, that imbalance in the good and bad bacteria. And also high cortisol levels can promote abdominal fat deposition. So the fat being deposited around the abdomen, so in the midsection, and in turn weight gain as well.
So it sounds like from what you're saying that stress management is a big part of restoring balances in the gut. Is that right?
Huge, absolutely huge. I mean, we have something called the gut-brain axis, which is the way that the gut and the brain communicate with each other. It works both ways. So the gut talks to the brain sends signals to the gut. And when we're stressed, our gut is affected, whether we're experiencing direct digestive symptoms or it's flaring up in other ways, whether that's our skin, whether that's our mood, whether that's our hormones, all these things that are linked to the gut-brain axis is at play all the time. So stress levels play a really big role in our gut health.
And so we've spoken about upping fiber and stress management, and obviously, balancing someone's gut is an individual thing. It's going to depend on their specific types of imbalances as to what you do. But are there any other kind of core foundations that you feel probably apply to most people in terms of optimizing your gut health?
Yeah, for most people, they should really focus on eating a balanced diet. So consuming a large variety of whole nutrient-dense foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, lean proteins, and also really focus on diversity. So having a diverse range of plant-based foods, especially. So rather than every day having like chicken with carrots and broccoli and brown rice day in, day out, doing your meal prep for the 7 days ahead, thinking you're smashing it, you're not giving your gut enough diversity, and our gut microbes thrive off diversity. So if you always buy, let's say, broccoli, carrot, and mushrooms, tomorrow or next time you go to the supermarket, get instead cauliflower, red peppers, or orange peppers if you don't usually have them, courgette, maybe even go to the farmer's market, see what's in season, pick up different varieties of things you don't usually. If you usually get a brown onion or a white onion, get a red onion next time. The more diversity, the better. So that's really important. And then one other tip I'd say is focus on fermented foods. So fermented foods, things like sauerkraut, which is fermented cabbage, kimchi, kombucha, miso, tempeh, all of these contain what we call probiotics. So that's good bacteria that can help to benefit our gut microbiome.
I really love your example of chicken and rice and a little bit of veg, because when you see online the meal plans that are prepared by influencers for people to help them stay in a calorie deficit, so often it is these repetitive, like meal prep type meal plans where you're having the same thing day in, day out. And it's, again, very one-dimensional. It's just looking at the calories. And yes, it's quote unquote healthy because it's not processed and, there's good quality protein, but it really lacks that diversity. So, it's fine to do that sort of thing, but we just want to make sure we're getting diversity, particularly in the vegetables and the herbs and the spices that we're using day to day, right?
Totally, I couldn't agree more. Even things like, if you think about breakfast time, if you usually have porridge or a yogurt bowl with some nuts and seeds, think about how you can vary the toppings every day. So if you usually just have porridge with honey and banana, maybe scrap the honey and instead of the banana, do blueberries or raspberries, or get a bag of mixed frozen berries. By the way, nothing wrong with frozen fruit, frozen vegetables. Often it's actually more nutrient dense because it's frozen at its prime, so the nutrients haven't kind of depleted over time. You can mix those straight into your porridge. You can microwave them for 30 seconds so you have a quick cheating berry compote. Add pumpkin seeds or sesame seeds or chia seeds or flax seeds. Add a teaspoon of almond butter, just ideally not one with lots of added sugar and salt. Think about, again, with your yogurt bowl, chopped up almonds, chopped walnuts, a couple of Brazil nuts. There's so much we can vary. So even if you like to have the same kind of food on repeat, you can tweak different things. If you always have brown rice because you think it's a healthy grain, swap it for quinoa or bulgur wheat or wild black rice. There's so much diversity that we are given in nature that we don't take advantage of and that our gut microbes would love.
It's such a good reminder that you can still have the same meal, but just swap a couple of elements of it to vary up that fiber intake.
Definitely.
And also just going back to what you're saying about fermented foods, I just find it fascinating reading up about fermented foods because there's more and more research coming out about just how powerful even just a small amount of them in the diet can be. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit now and just ask you whether there's been any like recent kind of findings or development in the research when it comes to gut health, because there are some incredible studies out there.
There are so many studies out there. There's one actually really interesting study that I was reading about recently, and it's about the impact of following a Mediterranean diet, which obviously we've all heard about before, and an exercise regime on our gut health and weight loss. So what I found interesting was this study was looking at all of these facets together and how they intersect. So we know that a Mediterranean diet can support a diverse and a healthy gut microbiome, and obviously engaging in regular exercise is also important for this. And we know that a healthy gut microbiome can make it easier to lose weight. So this study is kind of evaluating the relationship between all these areas. And the findings showed a change in the gut microbiome in the participants who were closely following the Mediterranean diet and engaging in the exercise compared to those who were only doing the diet. So I thought that was really interesting because often we forget that exercise comes into it too. It's not just about what we eat, it's our lifestyle, it's about our movement. So the people in the diet and exercise group also lost more weight. And that was actually the first study to suggest that kind of synergistic benefit of the diet and the exercise for gut health and weight loss as well. So tying these all in together, I think there's so much evidence for the Mediterranean dietary pattern. There isn't even really a specific definition that everyone agrees on for the Mediterranean diet, but it's basically that dietary pattern combined with exercise for gut health and weight loss.
That's fascinating about the combination of the exercise with the Mediterranean diet and the impact of that on your gut health.
Yeah.
And it's just so refreshing to hear that there's finally some research being done on weight management that isn't just about how many calories people are eating, and it's looking deeper at what's going on in the body. So
100%. And it's nothing crazy. It's nothing groundbreaking. There is no weird supplements or powders that they're looking at or crazy dietary trends. This is all achievable stuff that you and I and our clients and our friends and families can be doing. So I really like that it was something that was kind of relatable and attainable as well.
Yeah, because so many research studies create this kind of intervention plan or environment that just is not like the real world, whether that's really high doses of certain supplements or certain types of supplements that just aren't accessible for the public, or whether it's conditions of a diet where, the people are basically living in a vacuum and are not exposed to any kind of outside temptations or whatever it might be. It's really helpful that this research is being done on real people in real environments.
Exactly. I totally agree. I think that's so important that it's something that people can relate to because, like you said, none of us are living in a vacuum. We all have all these other aspects to our life to consider as well.
So I think more and more people are understanding more about the gut microbiome and probably hearing that term bandied around quite a lot. And one of those reasons would be through Zoe, which I'm sure most people know what it is now, but in case people don't know what it is, it's a program that involves gut testing and blood glucose monitoring. And I would really love to know your opinion on Zoe and particularly like the gut test element of it.
For sure. So what I think Zoe has done amazing things for progressing that conversation around gut health and really being at the forefront of research around this topic as well. Obviously, it's something I'm super passionate about. I think that the gut is fascinating, and I think we should all be paying more attention to our gut. So I think it's great to give people more access to that personalized health data. It can be really empowering because we're all so different, and what works for one person doesn't work for another. So it's good to be more aware and to pay attention to our personal, what works for us. It can also help to kind of, by paying attention to our gut health, we can in turn reduce our risk of certain diseases. So all of that's great. And that's something that we should all be striving for. The thing is, the program does involve wearing a continuous glucose monitor, or a CGM, a blood sugar monitor. And there's a lot of talk on social media at the moment, but many people are against this as a concept because it's not necessary if you don't have diabetes to be constantly monitoring your blood sugar. But while it's not necessary, I actually think it can be interesting, it can be beneficial, it can help people to understand their bodies a bit better. I'm not saying everyone should do it, but you wear it for 2 weeks as part of the program. And I think wearing a blood sugar monitor for 2 weeks can be really insightful. You can try out different things. You can try having, for example, a bowl of plain porridge one day, and the next day adding some protein powder and nuts and seeds and blueberries. So you're getting fiber and some healthy fats, maybe from the nuts. And seeing the change in your blood sugar, that when you add things like protein and healthy fats and fiber, you have less of a sharp glucose spike followed by a sharp crash than if you're just having the carbohydrates alone, for example. And obviously fluctuations in blood sugar are so normal, that goes without saying. But I think there's no harm in trying it. I know that, like I said, it's not necessary and you don't have to be doing it. You don't have to become obsessed with it. But I think ultimately that dietary advice that you get from Zoe, it's nothing novel. It's essentially following healthy eating principles, including multiple food groups at meals to support your blood sugar, eating high fiber foods, which we know is great for our gut health, lots of plant foods, fermented foods, reducing our overall consumption of red meat. All of this is just going to benefit your health. So you can quite easily take this advice and save your money. You don't need necessarily to do the whole program. But I think if people do wish to spend their money and they choose to do it on Zoe, it can have quite significant and positive implications if they're willing to learn more, if that's something that they're interested in. But yeah, not for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think it's, always helpful to find out more about what's going on in your body. I always think that you have to interpret the information wisely. And one of the things that a big misconception, I think, is that a lot of people are striving for this steady blood glucose pattern where there's no highs or lows. Because it's kind of somehow that's the message that's been put out there, not by Zoe, but just generally from all the influencers potentially who are using these glucose monitors. But it's totally normal to have ups and downs in your blood sugars, right?
Totally. Yeah. And we need to remember that. We need to remember that our blood sugar is supposed to fluctuate. Our glucose, our blood sugar, it goes up, it goes down. And luckily for most of us, if we don't have diabetes or serious issues controlling our insulin resistance and our glucose management, our bodies are amazing. Our bodies are so smart. And as our blood glucose rises and becomes quite high, our bodies will naturally help to bring it back down. We'll release the hormones that we need to reduce our blood sugar. So when our glucose is going up, we produce more insulin to bring it down. When it's going too low, we release hormones to help to bring it back up, or we release more glucose that we've been storing in the body to give us that energy. And so our body helps to keep it in homeostasis or in balance, which is amazing. And we should be thankful for our bodies. We shouldn't always try to monitor and control everything. I think it can be really interesting, and you can feel more in tune with your body by doing it for a week or two. And it's nice to understand it. But of course, as you said, and I said as well, we're not aiming for a straight line of glucose. That's not possible. It's always going to fluctuate. We just want to reduce really sharp, sudden spikes and crashes. So wearing it can help you to learn how to do that, but ultimately remembering that it's normal to have those fluctuations.
Yeah. And I think of it a little bit like if someone was going to use some sort of calorie or macro tracking app like MyFitnessPal, helpful to do for maybe a couple of weeks just to get an insight into roughly where you're at with how much protein you're getting and fats and carbs, but definitely not something that we want to get obsessed with and that we're, trying to micro manage too much.
I couldn't agree more. And I take the same view with things like calorie counting, macros, apps. I mean, I don't encourage my clients to use any of those, but when occasionally I get someone who's set on the idea of doing it, I say, okay, do it for a week or two, get an idea of where you're at, but this isn't something that you need to allow to control your life and dictate what you eat.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very easy to get obsessed with them and it can cause a lot more stress. And it's also just not necessary for achieving, improvements in your health or reaching your weight loss goals, you really don't need to be tracking at that kind of real microscopic level.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Gut 360 podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast or learned something new, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And make sure you hit follow for weekly episodes every Monday morning. Do share this podcast with anyone who you think it may benefit. And for your chance to win a free online nutrition consultation with me, just take a screenshot of this episode and share it on your Instagram stories, tagging @EllieBreacher Nutrition so I can repost you.